So hello everyone, welcome on coming back to the 2020. So glad to hear you and see all of you. I just promoted this, especially in a Spectrum Protect user group. So most of the users, this material will be available only for their hands. So my special guest today is Tricia. Is it Jiang or Yang? How to say it properly?
Jiang. I hear it all. So it all works for me.
Okay, it all works for me. I'm Mączka, so it also works for me. So we met with Tricia a few years ago, and I'm really glad that we have you here. So I ask you to, let's say, share what's new in the Spectrum Protect 8.19 and Spectrum Protect Plus 10.15. It's many features that we put on the board actually 2 months ago, correctly. So I think it's a great opportunity to right now go in and share the slides and the knowledge about it. Tricia, a few words from your side, and we can start.
Great. Well, thank you everybody, and welcome to the call today. This is a really great release in the fact that we actually had quite a bit of information both in the Spectrum Protect as well as the Spectrum Protect Plus and the Spectrum Copy Data Management. And I'm going to touch a little bit on this because as we go down the road, you're going to see this CDM being pulled in, and you'll have this opportunity to integrate that as well into your Spectrum Protect and Spectrum Protect Plus environment. So we'll make sure we give you an update on that. So this did GA back in November 22nd. And we've had good results from the field, a lot of positive feedback on the different options I'm going to be talking about today. Now, as you know, we are developing on a schedule where we try to get about 3 releases out per year. And so some of these features that I'm going to talk about today kind of build upon the things that we've already seen out there in the prior releases, but we'll continue to add functionality, add platforms to these to make these functions even more usable. So I'll go ahead and get started. We'll first of all talk about the Spectrum Protect, then we'll look at Spectrum Protect Plus, and then CDM. And just for your information, because we have so much detail out there, and I know we have a limited time on this call today, there are a lot of useful YouTubes, there's demos, there's deep dives on a lot of these topics out there. And so I've put out the URLs that link to the YouTubes if you want to go and see these functions in action. So the first one is our AIX S3 object agent. And back a couple releases ago, we introduced in version 8.17 the ability for the Spectrum Protect server to become a receptacle for S3 type of data. And this is really kind of cool if you think about all of the data that's being produced out there in an S3 environment, and we want to be able to send that to the Spectrum Protect server to be protected. The first releases that we're putting out there are just going to be accepting the Spectrum Protect Plus data as an S3 offload. And back in version 8.17, we introduced a Linux and a Windows native object agent for the Spectrum Protect server. Well, what does that mean? Spectrum Protect server has to be able to speak S3. It's a new language to us. And so we kind of need this interpreter out there to be able to translate the S3 data into a format where we can correctly store it and track it. And so this translator, if you will, is what we call our object agent. And an object agent will be installed on your Spectrum Protect server. And back in version 8.17, we introduced that on the Linux and Windows, and then we had the AIX running as an off-boarded agent. In version 8.19, we now also have an AIX native agent. So for each Spectrum Protect server, you install this object agent. Now, if you have multiple Spectrum Protect servers running on one box, you're going to need an object agent for each of those servers, even if they're on the same physical hardware.
Okay, so one agent is dedicated to the Spectrum Protect instance, actually, yes?
Exactly. One agent per instance is going to be the relationship there. And so this agent's going to be out there hanging out, just kind of waiting for these S3 pieces to come through. And in conjunction with the agent, we now have what we call an object client. So just like how we have a NAS client that understands NAS data, we have a backup archive client, we have these clients who understand the backups coming from VMware or from your databases, we now have what we call an object client. So not only will you define an object agent, but then for each entity who's sending you S3 data, you will define an object client. And there are a couple YouTubes out there that kind of walk you through these steps. It's really simple when you open up in the Operations Center. And the cool kind of thing about these object clients is when you define them, they kind of look like the same entity you see when you hook up to a cloud entity where you have like the secret password and stuff like that. So you'll feel like you're basically defining the same type of entities as you see when you define cloud storage out there. So this is a real excellent way that right now, like I said, we're only pushing across Spectrum Protect Plus data, but watch this space because we'll be opening it up to other S3 agents in the future.
Two questions here, Tricia. I mean that we have a Power 8 Plus. So of course it means the minimum processor. So all of the Power 9 processors, this agent is working, yes? Just to clarify it here.
That's correct. So this would be anything Power 8 and above with AIX 7.2 and above on it.
Okay, on the architecture, we can see the Spectrum Protect Plus. It means that we need always the plus in the architecture, or the agent can work independently from the plus. So we can ingest the data directly through the S3 to the Spectrum Protect.
Yeah, currently we're only working with the Spectrum Protect Plus as our object client. That's the only object client that we can connect with. But like I said, in the future, that object client could be connecting with other S3 entities who could be sending data to our object agent and then stored in our Spectrum Protect server. So watch this space. I think you're going to see a lot of interesting extensions of the types of data we can protect and store in our Spectrum Protect environment. Okay, the next new enhancement is our retention sets. And this is specific to the fact that in 8.1.7, we introduced this concept of a retention set. And I love retention sets because what they did was they took our backup data, which is based upon versions. So when you set up your policies and your backups, you say, I want to keep 3 versions of a file or 4 versions. We also had the concept of an archive where you could send a file and we could keep it for a specific amount of time. But what we found is that we had customers who said, I want you to take the backups and be able to transform them into an archive, basically. Or I need to have a standalone type of snapshot that shows how this particular client looked on this particular date. So what exactly did the data look like? And previously our customers used to do things like a one-off backup on the first of each month that they would then preserve for a specific amount of time. But this is kind of wasteful. It's a lot of extra churn. So in 8.1.7, we introduced retention sets where you can take existing backup data, you create a retention set around it, and that is now going to hold that data even after it has expired from your normal versions, and it's going to hold it for that specific amount of time. So maybe I'm taking that retention set on the first of the month, and I'm holding that data for 7 years. Even if the versioning behind that expires off, I'll keep those entities as a retention set. And so this is going to mean you don't have to do any extra backups. It means we've added a new field in there that not only tracks the versions, but now tracks if it's being held as a retention hold, as a retention piece. Well, what happens if you're called into court, or if something's going on, you have some type of contingency where you say, you know, normally I only keep that copy for 7 years, but now I need to keep that retention set for, well, I don't know how long. I don't know how long this court case is going to go on, or how long I'm going to need to retain that. So now I can put a hold on that retention set and keep that retention set itself from expiring off until I release it and say, okay, now I'm done with it. You can go ahead and use the normal expiration on that retention set. The retention holds are really nice because I can put a lot of information in about why I created it and why I released it. And this becomes kind of like an audit trail. So I can understand who put the hold out there, why it was put out there, and then when I'm ready to release it, why it was released. So retention sets are very easy to set up inside of the Operations Center. You can also do it through command lines or scripts. And retention holds will then be added to existing retention sets. And then the other thing we've added is this email reporting, where inside of the Operations Center, we now have a couple extra reporting options, which will show you which retention sets are out there. And that way, if you're just wanting some oversight of what's out there, you can easily gather that information. Questions on retention sets or retention holds? I think this is a really, really nice.
From my side also, what's the most favorite usage of the retention set, just for the reminders for those who are not familiar with this feature?
I think the most common thing we see is that there are regulatory requirements out there, or a company has a requirement that says, I need to have a point-in-time backup of this computer for a specific time frame. So I need to, every first of the month, I want a snapshot of what that looks like. And so that's where these retention sets, retention rules, and retention holds really help out. All without having to re-back up the data, all without having to add extra overhead to your networks, and all without having to add extra entities into your existing database and storage pools.
Yeah, we need to keep in mind that before that, we need to every time again send the data into the server. Right now, it makes much more life easier for the administrator with this feature.
Right, and for those people on the call, really go out and take a look at your setup and see, hey, do I have some of those monthly backups, which are full backups, that I can now get rid of and replace with this retention set? Perhaps someone who previously set up the environment had set up something like that, and you can kind of reduce your overhead by getting rid of those types of scheduled backups and implementing the retention set instead.
Tricia,
okay, in the past, okay, Grzegorz.
In the past, we had this kind of concept of data sets, right? So it was possible to create a picture of your environment and preserve it somehow.
Yeah, previously we had something called a backup set, and that backup set was actually a standalone entity that could be created and put onto its own media. And then if you wanted to restore from that backup set, you did not even need the Spectrum Protect database because it was a standalone entity. These retention sets are a lot simpler because I don't have to make a second copy of the data like I did for the old backup sets. And they're being automatically monitored, expired, and everything else directly in the Spectrum Protect database, unlike our older backup sets. Now, one thing
we need to keep in mind that the backup set was, there was quite long process to create and to copy. Right now, it's much more, robust process.
Definitely. The other thing to keep in mind is watch our roadmap on this, because right now these retention sets are done in place. We're not moving the data anywhere. So if when I create a retention set, that data exists on a disk container pool, and then I migrate that out to, I tier that out to tape or tier that out to cloud, it just kind of tracks where the data goes. But we know we have customers who want to be able to create a retention set, create that copy like we used to do with backup sets out to tape. So watch this space. You're going to see us adding in the ability to create a secondary copy of a retention set onto like a different media. Okay, here's how simple it is inside of the Operations Center to create this retention set hold. The main thing to remember here is that you already have to have your retention rules and your retention sets existing, and then you can go into the new retention hold category, do a create hold. You'll put a little bit of information about who's creating it, which server, why it's being created, and then you'll see that hold show up underneath the Operations Center. Then you can add data retention sets to hold. So if you had an existing hold and now you found some more data that needs to be added to that specific court case hold or whatever it is, you can do that as well. and you'll put why you added that to it. When it's time to release, the key is if you do a hold on a retention set, you have to manually release it. The retention set itself will expire off unless there is a hold on it. If there's a hold, you must release it. And that can be done simply through the Operations Center as well. And once again, you will give a reason why you released it, and that'll become part of the audit log. Now, the audit log is actually separate from your activity log. So if you're used to the concept of keeping your activity log out there for 30 days or something like that, the information that we put in for these retention sets and retention holds will be maintained even after your activity log has expired off.
Tricia, a question here, because we have this concept of two people authorization needed to delete the data. Is it applicable also to retention sets?
Well, that's a great segue to my question, my next slide here. The question has to do with this new command approval for restricted commands. And this command approval for restricted commands was introduced in 819. And what it means is that for these type of commands here on the left-hand side, if you have turned this on, this is optional, you don't have to turn it on in your environment, but if you have turned on command approval, you will need one or more administrators to approve commands that include, that could potentially destroy some data. So for instance, this release ret set, this command right here, has to do with the retention set release holds that we just talked about. So as an administrator, if I decide to turn on command approval, the first thing I have to do is I have to decide who are the approvers going to be. And then I'm going to set my command approval on. And I am then, anytime this type of command like this release ret set is issued, either from a command line, from the API, or from the Operations Center, that command goes into a queue and is waiting until an approver comes along and says, yeah, that's okay, that's a valid command, go ahead and release it. Go ahead and execute that command. Now we actually have two levels of approval here. The first one is if I turn it on, then anybody who is a command approver can approve when these commands are issued. The second level is even the command approvers themselves have to have their commands approved. So this just gives the concept of nobody can get away with issuing these commands without having them checked first. One area we see these commands this command approval being used as well is you can have a Spectrum Protect administrator who is only a command approver. They have no other privileges. They can't define nodes. They can't do anything else. They can only approve these commands. So that could be like a third party or somebody else who operates in that capacity. But the thing I really like about this command approval is that it gives a second set of eyes to these commands that could potentially delete data, remove data, or in the case of those retention sets, remove the hold on those data. Have you seen, Paul, have you seen anybody implementing these?
Not yet. Not yet, but I need to advise few of my customers, to go in this direction. I don't think that, we need to educate on it. So honestly, I will also take the advantage of this feature and speak about it.
And you can always turn it on, and if you decide, this is a little too cumbersome, maybe we don't need this yet, you can turn it off and you won't have caused any problem. So it's one of those things that's easy to give it a spin, turn it on inside of the Operations Center and see if it works in your environment or not.
Tricia, one question here, because the second approval might be, for example, a person from legal department, right, who is just validating if we still need this data. Question is, what kind of information he's receiving, and does he need to log on to Operations Center, or he can just receive it via email and approving via email, for example? How does it look like in practice?
So in practice, you could do it either where you just go into the Operations Center and you look at the commands in the queue that are pending, or you can set up an alert where when one of these commands is put into the pending queue, an email is sent out to one of the approvers that says, hey, there's a command awaiting approval. However, that approver is either going to have to issue a Spectrum Protect command to approve it, or they're going to have to go into the OC. So, you know, if you're really savvy, you could set up a little script that if the legal department looks at it and says, yeah, that's okay, and clicks yes, it sends off a script. Or if you have a more savvy Spectrum Protect administrator, they could just go back into the OC and click the approval.
Mm-hmm. Let's move forward. I think we have a few more slides.
We sure do. Okay, the web client. Back in version 8.1.2, we had to remove our existing web client just because it wasn't working with our new security where we exchange certificates between our Spectrum Protect servers and clients. 8.1.7, we reintroduced it. 8.1.8, we added a little bit of more functionality with restored alternative locations. 8.1.9, we added an AIX support and the ability to search across all the file spaces when you're doing a restore. The nice thing about this web client is it allows the help desk to go in and help a customer do restores or things like that. The thing you need to remember is you have to install the web client on that Spectrum Protect client. It is part of the backup archive client install, but if that client's already out there, then you'll need to go ahead and install that. And I do have a YouTube out there that shows the install steps on that. Okay, HSM for Windows. I don't know if we have anybody on the call who's using the HSM for Windows, but the reason I left this slide in is I really like where it's going. We're taking all of this data and information and status that the HSM for Windows, and what HSM for Windows does is it takes files that are seldom used or extremely large, and it takes that off of the production server, replaces it with a little stub placeholder, and moves the actual file off to the Spectrum Protect server so that you don't have your production machines being cluttered by a lot of unused files. Well, the great thing about what was introduced with this REST API is that now we can extract a lot of the information about the types of migrations, the types of recalls that are happening, and we can monitor them either through the Grafana or Prometheus. I love this because we're always getting asked for the ability to do monitoring software. I know we have a lot of great options out there for our customers to use with third-party products, but if a customer just wants to try it out with the Prometheus or Grafana, you're going to see us introducing more of this type of functionality, not only in HSM for Windows, but in our other components as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on at this point to the Spectrum Protect Plus piece. Was there any questions on Spectrum Protect before I move on? Okay.
Let's move forward, I guess.
So Spectrum Protect Plus, this was a big release for us, version 10.1.5. Here's the functionalities that we released, and I'll be covering quite a few of those. The first one, which made a really big splash, was our container support. And this is not container as in Spectrum Protect Plus, Spectrum Protect containers. This is containers as in Kubernetes. As you know, we purchased Red Hat, and when we purchased Red Hat, one of the functionalities and features we were most interested in is this whole concept of containers, i.e. Kubernetes, OpenShift, and this type of area. And for those of you who haven't explored yet, what does this mean? What is Kubernetes? Why would I need it? Think about VM, think about virtual machines and where we were 10 years ago with virtual machines, where we were going from having just physical hardware running one instance of a computer. So now a physical hardware can run multiple operating systems, multiple machines out there. And that probably has changed your environment drastically. Well, containers is taking this the next step up. So instead of having to have individual little virtual machines running on a physical machine, I can now remove the operating system from those virtual machines and just have the operating systems being shared out. So I make those virtual machines lighter. And this is kind of the containerization of the world that we live in.
And the great thing is that we've seen a huge growth in here. So in the last 2 years, I know that 2 years ago when we started to talk about how to protect the Kubernetes on the OpenShift, everybody said that there is no point to doing it. Right now, it's more and more we have inquiries that okay, we have more and more persistent volumes, or we treated the Kubernetes or the OpenShift containers as a VMs. Even it's not always the proper way how to manage, but many of the admins do it. And of course, more and more containers are going to the production. So there is still business requirements and business continuity for this type of the workloads, I guess.
And the key is, like you said, the persistent volumes, because when containers came out, they were just being used for applications like Siri, where they'd pop up, answer a question and go away. They weren't storing any data. And now we have more and more applications actually having persistent volumes underneath that with data in it that needs to be maintained and needs to be protected. So Spectrum Protect is coming in on the cutting edge here and offering protection for those persistent volumes. And so Spectrum Protect Plus does have this container that you install, and it provides interface with a CSI snapshot that you'll have inside of your Kubernetes environment. And you'll basically be able to set up some scripts and schedule it so that you have scheduled backups going out of your persistent volumes being sent to the Spectrum Protect Plus server, which resides outside of your Kubernetes environment. And you can also do on-demand snapshots out to the Ceph storage, but the basics is we're going to send those snapshots once a day and offload them to the Spectrum Protect Plus server. The great thing about this is you'll see us keep adding functionality to here. As the CSI piece, which is not our software, we just interface with that. As it becomes more advanced, we'll be able to become more advanced with it. And since we're in there at the cutting edge, we're being able to influence the way that backups are being done and the way that the CSI snapshot's being developed. So watch this space. We're going to be doing more and more and more in the backups of those persistent volumes. Questions on that?
Just adding that definitely the Red Hat is investing, and the Ceph will be the major storage here. So we've seen the changes even in the last few versions of the OpenShift. So we definitely, it's if you considering to invest it in a containers, be also familiar with the Ceph technology, not only as object storage but as a storage itself. So
right, and our environment, when we tested this and came out with it, we just tested initially with Ceph, but there's no reason why we couldn't support other subsystems. It's just a testing effort. So you will see us expanding to different disk subsystems as well.
Okay.
Tricia, are all Kubernetes versions supported currently, or it has to be some precise versions?
Yeah, so there are limited versions that we support. I don't have it on this slide, but we do have very specifics about what is supported out there. So it's not all versions right now, and I don't recall off the top of my head the versions we do support. I can get you that information though. I do have, that's written up in the white paper, and I'm glad to forward that to you. Oh, the one other thing I want to say is right now, the vSnap server is outside of the Kubernetes environment, as is the Spectrum Protect Plus server. Watch in the future as we also start moving options where you could have the vSnap server as part of this Kubernetes environment and different options as well. So we'll look at ways that in some environments it might make more sense to have the vSnap server or the Spectrum Protect Plus server as part of the actual Kubernetes environment itself.
Okay, it could be interesting, yeah, especially from
definitely.
the restoration time point of view, if it will be on site.
So with Spectrum Protect Plus, we back up the hypervisors, VMware and Hyper-V. We back up now we back up containers, and we also back up applications. And we have a whole list of applications that we back up. But the exciting thing that we added in this version is our Microsoft Office 365 Exchange and OneDrive support. So that now we can do scheduled and on-demand backups and restores of mailboxes, contacts, calendars, OneDrive. We integrate seamlessly with that Office 365 service and are able to then send the backup out to the Spectrum Protect Plus environment, which is separated from the Office 365 environment. We do this via a cloud proxy that gets installed that will communicate with the Office 365 and then send the information to our VADP. When it comes to restore, we can restore a specific version, we can restore a point in time, we can restore to different accounts. Currently, there's no item level restore, but that's coming in the future for the Office 365. And OneDrive. It's really cool too that you can do this with all the OneDrive information as well.
And can we then add it to the retention sets?
So the question is, can we add this to the retention set? Since this is a Spectrum Protect Plus, it's going out to the Spectrum Protect Plus environment. You could then offload that to the Spectrum Protect environment and add that into a retention set. But actually, it wouldn't work right now because we don't support cloud. We don't support the S3 client nodes as part of a retention set. So it would not be able to be integrated with that. What you can do, though, is once you back it up to Spectrum Protect Plus into your VADP proxy, then you can offload it. You can send a copy out to like a deep archive, and I actually have a slide on some of those new features there. One of those new, I'll get to that in a second, but any other questions on Office 365 before I talk about offloading the Spectrum Protect Plus data? Okay, so I'll come back to that other slide, but on this slide right here, when we talk about how we can make different copies of your Spectrum Protect Plus data, one of the things that a lot of customers have asked is being able to send a copy out to a deep archive that can be retained for a long period of time on cheaper storage. So kind of the same idea as a retention set. And we have introduced the ability with AWS S3 Glacier as one of our deep archive capabilities. And when we do a deep archive, it's going to be a full copy of that Office 365 or MongoDB or whatever you're sending off to the archive. Versus up here where we have a copy that's going to a little more fast storage, not so cold of a storage entity, and that's going to be an incremental copy that's sent off. So we did introduce this Glacier Deep Archive, and that would give you the ability to retain data for a long time off of Spectrum Protect Plus, including the Office 365. Another piece we introduced is the ability to back up the VMC, VMware's cloud data out there that resides on AWS. So basically, inside of AWS, the only place that you can run VMs, VMware VMs, is inside of a VMC cloud. And initially, because of limitations on VMC, we couldn't back up VMC VMware images to Spectrum Protect Plus. And in this latest version, we did add the ability to stream the backup and the restores of these types of VMC entities out there. Now, the difference between a streaming restore versus a storage vMotion restore, first of all, your storage vMotion is not going to be available in the AWS VMCs, but the streaming is going to bring back the entire restore prior to you having access to that. Whereas with storage vMotion, you can actually start accessing that virtual machine while it's still being restored. Your restore is not going to be as fast, but it is going to be more accessible faster. This also becomes important when we talk about how Spectrum Protect Plus is sold as an option inside of AWS. You can actually order a Spectrum Protect Plus vSnap as a backup strategy inside of AWS. And so that now allows us to back up not only databases that are sitting in AWS, but also VMware images that are sitting inside of VMC on AWS.
I understand, Tricia, that is strictly related to the AWS. So we're not talking about this kind of the feature in a different cloud providers.
Correct. This is currently just AWS, and that's just because inside of AWS, unlike the IBM cloud, the VMware images are restricted to inside of these VMCs. They can't run natively.
Okay. Looks like a great feature from the disaster recovery point of view, yes. So
definitely a great feature from the disaster recovery, and it's also a great feature in the fact that you think about how prevalent AWS is and how much of a workload a lot of our customers have out in AWS.
Mm-hmm.
And so they need to be able to provide protection for that. Okay, validation for third-party devices. In the last slide, we talked about certifying specific devices, for instance, this AWS S3 Glacier. But what we find both in Spectrum Protect and in Spectrum Protect Plus is that there's a lot of third-party devices out there. And it's usually just a matter of testing them to make sure that all of the calls and everything are being handled the same with S3, because just like any language, some people can program the S3 slightly different and you'll get slightly unexpected results. So we do have a verification program that if a third party wants to verify that Spectrum Protect Plus can send data to these S3 devices for either a copy or an archive, we will go ahead and walk them through the verification process, and then we'll publish them out on the website to show that they have been validated. We also added a nice feature for an ad hoc backup. So if you did have a backup fail, or if for some, maybe it was offline or something, you don't want to wait until the next scheduled backup kicks off, you can simply do an ad hoc backup immediately inside of Spectrum Protect Plus of an entity.
It's related to all of the agents and all of the VMs, SLAs?
Yep, it's related to all of the SLAs out there. Okay. Yeah. And this is nice because it's also great for testing, or you don't have to wait around for a long time for that to test. You could just kick it off immediately. Cloud Restore Wizard, if you are sending data off to the cloud, either as an archive or as a copy, when you go to restore that snapshot from inside of Spectrum Protect Plus, not only will you see the local copies that are available on your vSnaps, but you'll also see if it's out there in the cloud or if it's been offloaded to Spectrum Protect using the same offload and copy capability to our S3 object agent. So that just makes it really easy to understand where your backups are residing and which one you want to restore from. LDAP, we continue to make LDAP more even tighter integration with it inside of Spectrum Protect Plus. And so we just added some additional search functionality and performance of the group selection inside of LDAP for Spectrum Protect Plus. Okay, that was all on Spectrum Protect Plus. Any questions on that before I move on to copy data management?
Feel free to ask here. You won't bite. At least we try.
So Spectrum Protect copy data management, anybody who is familiar with the ability for your disk subsystems to take snapshots of your large databases, your large VMware images, even file spaces, understand that this is a great capability to rapidly take a copy of these large entities. And then with that copy, you can do different things. You can have multiple copies out there for restores, or for instance, if you're using Spectrum Protect Flash Copy, you can send a backup then back into Spectrum Protect. We're introducing this new copy data management software. It's been out there in the market for a while. And the reason I left this slide in is I want you all to start paying attention to copy data management, because you're going to see copy data management being integrated with the Spectrum Protect and Spectrum Protect Plus family. And so as you start thinking about, this database is taking a really long time to back up on its own, I want to be able to take a snapshot of it using devices like copy data management, but still have that integrated with my normal backups. This is where this is really going to play and be advantageous for you all. So we keep adding in functionality to copy data management, like our SAP enhancements and our hyper swaps and audit log enhancements. The next enhancement you're going to see is it's being pulled into our portfolio and more direct integration with Spectrum Protect and Spectrum Protect Plus. So watch this space. Questions on copy data management? So that takes me to the end of the slide deck here. Just to reiterate, this whole presentation has a lot more detail out there. For instance, there was questions about which Kubernetes environments we support and so forth. So you can check out my YouTube channel where I think we have like an 1.5 hour presentation that goes into even more detail on these pieces, as well as demos of the individual objects and functions.
Yeah, so for sure it's the first but not the last one with you. So great to have you here. So let's stay in touch, all of the user group. Thank you. And let's please follow us on the LinkedIn on our user group. And as I said, if you will have any question, just feel free to contact us privately. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paweł. Thanks, Tricia.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.